IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Rohan Seth and I am joined here today by Prateek and Anupam, which is sort of similar to my dream team that I would pick to discuss this topic, because we're today going to talk about anti-competitiveness and WhatsApp. So if you're not aware, the Competition Commission of India was recently in charge of releasing this order that talked about whether or not a WhatsApp pay application would be anti-competitive. And the decision actually eventually ruled in WhatsApp's favor. And there is just a lot to discuss in the order that came out after it. It's a 41-page order and has a lot of nuances that we can get into. So without further ado, I just want to get Prateek here to lay out the context for us and tell me what exactly happened with this order.
Yeah, so it's fairly interesting, right? What the informant in this case basically argued that there were two relevant markets as far as this, the situation was concerned, and that WhatsApp was using its position in one of the markets to establish dominance in the other. Right now, for context, the first market that they had defined was the market for internet-based messaging applications through smartphones in India, and the second one was the market for UPI-enabled digital payment applications in India. Right, and they basically said that look, WhatsApp is the largest player in market one. It's dominant, and it can use its position to essentially force WhatsApp Pay onto other users of WhatsApp, make them use it, and by that logic, they're abusing their dominance in one market to the other. And this, again, I'm not an expert on competition law, but this goes against the spirit of, I think, it goes against Section 4(2)(e) of the Competition Act.
Just ignoring all the sections and all of that for the moment, it just a very simple kind of complaint against WhatsApp that it is a massive player in the instant messaging market, and it will use that in order to build up its position in the UPI or the payment market, right? And that was the main complaint, and that essentially what this will lead to, the essence of the complaint is that this will lead to unfair practices or that it will lead to harm to the other competitors. So essentially, the informant, whoever that is, envisages a scenario where, because WhatsApp is now offering payment services along with its messaging services, other payment service providers such as PhonePe or Google Pay or anyone else can potentially get hurt, and also newer incumbent or newer entrant might also find it difficult to enter because of WhatsApp position. So it's, I think, most important to kind of first state it very clearly that this has not happened yet. It is in anticipation of something that might happen, because we don't know how all of this will play out. So this is an anticipation of something that will happen, and someone has, in that anticipation, made a complaint against WhatsApp.
So the gist of it, I think, is network effects without really seeing it.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. So there's a couple of really interesting positions here. So the end result, as Prateek said, was that the order came in favor of WhatsApp, that we don't have to take any action now. That's what it amounts to, right? And that, by the way, does not mean that no action will be taken in the future. It just means that as of now, nothing has to be done. So that's the brief summary of the particular order.
Okay, so I just want to sort of get back here to the defining market space, because competition law, from what I can understand, and I've read a few books on this, it's basically that you first need to define this market, then you need to prove that you're dominant in this market, and then you need to say that, well, you're using this dominance in this one market to gain dominance in some other market, and this is why you're being anti-competitive, right? So in this sense, the informant basically says, well, there are two markets. There is a UPI market and there is an instant messaging market. And because WhatsApp's so big in the instant messaging market, once it gets a UPI feature, no one else is going to compete. And to me, that makes perfect sense. And then WhatsApp goes ahead and says that actually we're in the user attention market, to which it just, Prateek has seen this with my comments on the document, to which I was like, this is just not done. Because I don't think there is a team at WhatsApp headquarters that's figuring out how to compete with Netflix for user attention. It's just not true. So I thought that was just trying to pull the discourse back from where it can potentially go. And I'm glad the Competition Commission rejects that particular market by saying that, well, this is not a user attention market. It's actually just a market for OTT messaging services. That's great. But
let me just step in on that front. I think this has been Facebook's and WhatsApp, Facebook's especially preferred strategy over the years to deflect the conversation about its dominance. So it always says that even Facebook, for instance, if you define the market for Facebook as purely just social media, internet, whatever based social media platform, something like that, then you'd find that it is probably, if not dominant, at least one of the really big players, right? Because you can find a couple of just its competitors exist, and some of its competitors it's also acquired over the years. But essentially, what Facebook thinks is that if you expand the scope of the market, and every single player who's been accused of dominance would love to do this, right? The Uber says it's not in the market for cab aggregators or app-based cab aggregators. It says it's in the market for transportation. So for Uber, it always says that a metro rail service or a public transport bus is its competitor, right? So similarly, Facebook also loves to do that. It says that anything which grabs people's attention is its competitor. So Netflix is Facebook's competitor, and so is anything else. I mean, if you want to go, for example, to the park, and that also requires a bit of your attention, it says that is also a competitor in a sense to Facebook. So anything that you do, other things that you do with your time is in a sense a competition to Facebook, is the way that it wants to put it. Now, of course, I mean, this is stretching the limits of, let's say, logic to an absurd end. And I think, you're right in the fact that they have rightly dismiss this notion that that they're in the market for attention. While that may be true, but I think a more relevant subset of the market is instant messaging services, right? And for instance, I mean, you could, for example, take it to another absurd end and say that WhatsApp is in the market for communication, for instance, right? Which means that even sending couriers by pigeon is a competitor to WhatsApp. Now, it might be technically, but it's not relevant, right? Purely by logic sense. So let's leave all of that out. But there's a more important thing to consider here, which is that, about the process that you mentioned as to when an investigation takes place. Now, just to actually specify, according to the Indian law, the competition law, and we can, debate whether that's the right thing to do or wrong. But according to the Indian competition law, you cannot, accuse of abuse of dominance until you do those steps that you mentioned. First, you have to define the relevant market. Then you have to actually prove that there is dominance. And to prove dominance, there's a particular whole set of tests, etc., that using which you can prove the dominance. And then, even then, by the way, dominance itself is not wrong. And this is quite clear in the way the Competition Commission operates. You have to prove abuse of dominance. Only then will some action be taken. Now, let's look at this particular case. And I might be taking a contrarian position to the two of you, but I think Competition Commission is absolutely right in its ultimate judgment, which is that and according to the law, according to its own law now, you can say that the law can be changed. And I'll give parallel examples of how the law could work. But according to the law now, CCI couldn't have done anything but what it did, right? Because how can you prove abuse of dominance when it's not even entered the market really, right? It's still not operating in the payments, this thing, right? So you can't, you can't, in anticipation of dominance, you can't take action. And the law doesn't allow CCI to do that. And just try to imagine just for a second, and I want to talk about the broad principles before we go into the specifics of the case. Try to imagine just for a second what would happen if you truly gave this kind of power to the regulatory authority, that it can anticipate dominance in various fields and then act preemptively. I think you'll end up with really bad outcomes in the market. So in purely that sense, I'm with the CCI on this one, that they didn't take any action. Now, just having said that, the US, for example, the Federal Trade Commission operates slightly differently. The Sherman Act actually gives the power to the regulators to in fact anticipate such dominance and take necessary actions. But it requires a very mature market, and it requires a extremely mature regulatory authority and good state capacity to pull that off. But I don't think I would be in favor of that in India.
Yeah, so there's a few points I want to add. I don't broadly disagree with the fact that the CCI has ruled. I think the CCI's decision, it's right. I think the timing of the case itself is a bit wrong because WhatsApp Pay is not something that exists outside of a beta phase. So there's that. And the test that we're talking about actually is called a SNP test. It's a small but significant non-transitory increase in price test. Thank God I said it all at once. But the point is that the Competition Commission basically acknowledges that, well, these are services that are not actually priced. So it's hard to apply this test and come to a good conclusion just by applying this test perfectly. The problem here is that this takes me back to the time when the Instagram acquisition was being debated. And I'm not sure if you guys remember, but at the time, network effects wasn't such a big thing. And we didn't actually know that Instagram was going to be so big, and network effects would basically mean that Facebook would become, I don't want to say monopoly, but a monopoly. And so these conversations I had when, I don't know if you remember, but BBM was a very prevalent messenger. And at the time I was having a chat with one of my friends, and he basically told me that, look, WhatsApp is going to overtake BBM because it's cross-platform and it's, and you don't need to have a BlackBerry device to do this. So, and to which I just said, it's so hard for me to imagine a world in which the status quo is so different that WhatsApp overtakes BBM as a dominant messenger. Look at where we are. No one here on this call has BBM. I'm pretty sure the listeners don't have BBM on their phone installed. If you do, it's good for you. But, and this is basically what the Competition Commission is saying. It's saying that, well, look, this whole thing about a WhatsApp Pay feature that is anti-competitive, I haven't seen a WhatsApp Pay feature. And from what WhatsApp has been telling the Competition Commission, it's going to be something that is applied non-coercively, which means that you can opt out of a WhatsApp Pay feature. So, and currently there is a pretty healthy market for this. There's Google Pay, there's PhonePe, there's Paytm, Beam, whatever. So, to assume that WhatsApp Pay is going to come in and basically just dominate this whole market without, it's not a foregone conclusion. And I broadly agree with that. At the same time, I feel like in the next 10 years, you will have a name for this effect, which in my head basically means that if you have one app that can do these two things, why have two apps effect? It's a bit long, but I think it will catch on. and that's basically it, right? I mean, if I had an app that I've been using my whole life as an app to text everyone I know, and that also lets me do payments, why would I have a phone pay on my app, on my phone? It just makes absolutely no sense. And that's why I feel like the timing is wrong.
Yeah, so agreed. I think, I think Anupam, you're finally not so contrarian because I think all of us tend to agree that maybe the case was a bit premature, right? Because the fact that it's not a service that's out yet, it's very hard to determine whether there is actually any abuse that is taking place at this time. Yeah, but I think what you mentioned, it also ties into part of what the complaint was about bundling of what it viewed as two different products, right? Where that WhatsApp, the messenger app, and WhatsApp Pay are essentially two different products, and by virtue of bundling them together, that was the word that was used, you're forcing it onto consumers, right? And I think WhatsApp was at pains to state that they're not necessarily two different products. WhatsApp Pay is just a feature of a WhatsApp, an app that gives you the ability to chat, voice call, video call, etc. Right? So that was their contention. But I think the Competition Commission came back and said that, look, they are essentially two different products. But what they also then clarified was that it was not necessarily bundling. What's happening here is you're tying the services together. But the fact that users have to specifically opt in and start using WhatsApp Pay, and that there would be no restrictions on making a UPI transaction with another provider, means again, and again, this can only be an assumption at this point because we've not seen how it will play out, right? But they basically use that to say that, look, at this point we can't establish a case for coercive bundling of any sort either.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, even on that aspect, right? I have a massive problem with even, let's say, even if that bundling is coercive or tying, I really don't think anything is wrong with bundling. For instance, lots of things that we use are bundled, and that doesn't mean that it has suddenly become dominant. I mean, you could, for instance, even as of now, in different payment service providers, right? On PhonePe, for instance, you can still shop. That's a bundling of service. You can, do a whole bunch of things. You can even, by the way, send chat messages on PhonePe and on Google Pay, right? You can use these services not just to pay, but you can say hi to your friend. Now, of course, no one will do that because you don't see any value in that, right? So similarly, unless WhatsApp truly offers value to customers, then it doesn't mean that it'll become dominant. So even if it bundles, even if it ties in, that is every single WhatsApp. It should not do that illegally, like let's say what Airtel did, where every person who had an Airtel SIM card also had Airtel.
Yeah.
Where they created accounts in people's name without consent. Now that is illegal, but I'm sure WhatsApp is not that stupid. Or hopefully not, right? So, but if they offer bundled services, I don't see anything completely wrong with it at all. As I said, lots and lots of apps that we use actually, derives value from this kind of bundling. Right? I think Rohan was saying that, but I don't see that as a negative point at all. For instance, if we use Microsoft Teams, right? Now, I can't say that I want to use Teams only for video conferencing, but I don't want Microsoft's bundled services of, OneNote and PowerPoint and Microsoft Word. It comes together as a package. You use it if you want. Don't use the entire thing if you don't want, right? Now, see, all of this comes from, the 98 case of Microsoft, where Windows was bundled along with Internet Explorer, and then that was bundled with the hardware, etc. Now, you have to remember that back then the choice was very limited. I think that was the fundamental thing there was that, Windows operating system is a platform. WhatsApp is not that kind of a platform which connects different apps, right? WhatsApp is one app and it is offering integrated service with one other. So it's not a platform, right? It's very important to remember that. And two, back then, you didn't have a lot of choice if not for Windows. Here, you don't even have to use WhatsApp messaging services if you don't like it. If you think it's bundled together with a payment system that you don't like, then don't use the entire WhatsApp. You still have that option. Very real option, by the way. You can use Signal or Telegram or whatever. If you lose out on the network effects, that's your problem, right?
I disagree that it's a very real option, but
okay. But that's the thing. See, there are this whole bundling thing happens in almost every single app we know. We may or may not realize it, but even for example, a platform which just plays songs also bundles some kind of social interactions along with it, right? To meet up with people or at least sync with people who also like the same set of songs, etc. So a lot of or even just a reviewing service, etc. Apart from just providing you content, right? It allows you to review, it allows you to read others' reviews, etc. From a food delivery thing, so on and so forth. Everything is bundled. That's how apps are built these days, and if that adds value to people's lives, so be it.
No, and I'm with you. I think bundling and tying services together, by virtue of that itself is not wrong, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But as Rohan was saying, I think you can maybe project a few years down the line and think that there is potential for concern there that just by the fact that WhatsApp is now offering you a frictionless way to pay, given that how widely used it is in India, it could be risky. But again, it's too early to point any of this out, right? And that I think that goes back to the point that maybe this complaint was a little premature. Maybe it needs to be looked at down the road. But at this point, I don't think there was much else that the Competition Commission could have done.
Yeah, and every single, and remember, unlike, again, a few other places, a few other platforms, in places like this, right, every single consumer has the option to multi-home. That is, they can use, even if it is bundled together, they can use, if they don't add value, right, they can use WhatsApp for messaging and can use Google Pay for payments or PhonePe for payments, and something else for something else. So you can offer all of these bundled services together, but it doesn't mean that is the thing that consumers will end up doing. Consumers will do what offers them the greatest value. And if it so happens that WhatsApp truly offers better value in terms of integrated service than anyone else, then, again, what the way I see it is that other messaging services which have got a user base will start doing this thing as well, right? So I think we, in a lot of these cases, get prematurely panicked. That you're going to have a dominant player, etc. And in the tech world, we know that the answer to most of these questions about dominance in technology is just more technology, right? So you have, before you know it, another tech player, like Rohan was mentioning, the BBM is nowhere in sight, or whatever that means, right? And so similarly, it's not hard to again think of a scenario where day after tomorrow you have another messaging service which offers payments plus something else, right? And that plus something else could be the differentiator.
Can I just add here that bunch of stuff that we talked about bundling, and generally I broadly agree with you that bundling is something that competition needs people to do. And the commission actually recognizes that, and it says that bundling in itself is not wrong. And the core of this is basically that abuse of dominance is a problem. Dominance itself may not be a problem, and it's something that I don't necessarily agree with. But the commission says that these 4 conditions need to be met to make sure that this tying is happening. And the second condition, I'm not going to read all 4 of them because it's just not. You can read section 93 of the order. The second point of this says that if you're tying stuff and the entity concerned is dominant in the market for the tying product. And the third section says that, the consumers don't have a choice to obtain a time product without the type product. So basically, if you're dominant and your consumers can't choose which one they should go with, then that's a problem. Okay. So abuse of dominance is a problem. Okay, we get that. But at the same time, I think there's not enough appreciation for network effects in this order, because there's a reason why this thing isn't called Messenger Pay. Okay. There's a reason why it isn't called Instagram Direct Pay, or it's just not a separate app called WhatsApp Pay. There's a reason why it's tied in together with WhatsApp. The people just start using it as a frictionless experience, and WhatsApp actually to one point say that we need users to accept these separate terms and conditions if they want to sign up for WhatsApp Pay. I mean, when was the last time agreeing to terms and conditions was actually a barrier to signing up for a service? It's never in my life served as one, and I'm pretty sure I'm a good proxy for the sample size of everyone in India, because I don't think anyone reads terms and conditions seriously, and because we look at, privacy is a big problem here, so I'm not going to sign up for this. And that's not going to happen in WhatsApp Pay either. So tying itself is a problem when it comes to abusing that dominance. And at the same time, if this order just appreciated network effects a bit more and just looked at how this thing could change, I think it's worth revising this, let's say in the next 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, because to be fair, right, all they say is with those 4 conditions, and this is the third condition you're referring to, right? They just say that it's not been established yet, right? And I don't think there is at this point they can say more. Right?
Yeah, but I'll even go one step further. I'm saying, what is the problem if WhatsApp says that it doesn't give you the option that if you have WhatsApp Messenger, you're compulsorily also signed on to WhatsApp Pay, or rather the other way around. I mean, again, as long as it's not done illegally, as I said, I don't think that by itself is a problem. As I said, there's lots of apps where you want one feature in that app, but you're forcefully also given a lot of other features. Now, just don't use that feature. You have the option of not using that feature. That's what I mean. Even if you're signed on to WhatsApp Pay, for instance, don't use WhatsApp Pay. Don't use it to make payments. That option always exists, right? You can use Google Pay to make your payments. So I don't see, again, that abuse of dominance is a very particular thing. Now, let me go further to say, what is that kind of abuse of dominance, which the CCI does not. The abuse of dominance is generally what the CCI understands, and what even the informant talks about is that they can start charging for it, etc. Now, again, WhatsApp and Facebook and all of these are free services, so I don't see that it's going to be a predatory pricing kind of thing where they're using all these tricks, using the network effect to build a huge user base and then start charging for it. I don't see that happening at all. That's not the problematic area, and even if that happens, by the way, people can switch over, right? But I think the real problem is, again, data sharing. So this is where you bring in data as one of the factors of consideration in everything that the CCI does in with relation to these tech companies, right? You no longer can just look at previously we looked at the strip test and so on, right? We no longer can or the acquisitions, mergers and acquisitions. It's no longer just market share and market capitalization and revenue that the companies earn and how much they're charging for a product. These cannot be the only set of considerations. You have to put in data as one of the considerations. So here, for instance, abuse of dominance could be that they are sharing data without this thing to the parent company with others. So WhatsApp data, if they start sharing, and this I think is a real problem area which I don't think has been talked about enough, but if WhatsApp starts using the data from what messages you and I share, use that to influence the payments that we make, or offer build up a store and then do those the targeted advertisements and then make you pay through WhatsApp Pay, for all of this, I think that is where you're harboring on or bordering this kind of abuse of dominance. That's the real issue in all of this, by the way. Not really some of these other concerns about force bundling and tying, etc. But what does that lead to is this kind of, if there is illegal data sharing, illegal, or it's not illegal now because we don't have a law which prevents this, but potentially at least harmful data sharing. I think that is what you got to speak about. And I'm not the expert on data at all. I think Pratik and Rohan, you guys should speak about this, but I think that's something that you got to consider.
I think I broadly agree with that because, to some extent it might be illegal because, we don't have a data protection law, but there is an RBI directive that says that you've got to localize your data. And if WhatsApp it comes in the near future, then we don't have a law in place, then they would have to comply with the localized directive, which would restrict sharing. They haven't always been compliant. That's something that we can get to later.
But localization would only prevent a cross-border flow. It wouldn't. It wouldn't prevent a cross-entity flow, right? Facebook can still choose to harvest that data in India. So so it still wouldn't prevent that.
Yeah. So and basically also on this data point that TCI needs to consider data in its decisions more. I think so. Section 6 talks a little bit about this, and I'm going to read out a little bit of that here. It's like, the problem is that the informant has further stated that UPI-enabled digital payment market deals with WhatsApp Pay will deal with customer-sensitive data and alleges that within the given volume of data, national security and data privacy can be compromised, and especially if the anti-competitive activities are left unchecked. So there is a broader point to argue here, which is that, well, if WhatsApp Pay harvests all this payment data, and there is, let's say, a leak or all this data goes to third parties that do not have Indians' best interests at heart, that could be a problem. But in an absolutely bizarre turn, the informant doesn't build on this claim a lot. It says that, well, localization hasn't always been respected by WhatsApp, which whatever, because, But at the same time, if they just went with this national security argument a bit more, they, I think, would have had a lot more leeway to at least get the commission to consider the data angle to this whole thing, which they just haven't done enough, and I don't figure out why.
But I am skeptical of pushing too many national security arguments, so I will, I would be wary of trying to use that to...
Because once you open that Pandora's box of national security, then you can just ban all of these apps and say it's against national security, as we have done.
Exactly.
I get that, but also just a rational actor model. I think this would have made for a much stronger case if the informant had just
I'm glad you were not the informant.
All right. Do we have any final thoughts with you guys on this?
No, not really. I think, it's just about don't act prematurely, don't panic prematurely. You don't have to wait until all of the damage is done and then act on it. But I think you've at least got to wait till the product is launched before saying that it's going to be massively dangerous to everyone around. So that's my takeaway.
All right. So this has been a case of premature eviction of WhatsApp. So we will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for listening to us in Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST. or our website, takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. So another really fun week on the network. I don't know if you saw this, but Varun Thakur was on Advertising is Dead. That was a really, really fun episode. Besides that, we've had some great guests all over the place. We had Ram Madhvani on Cyrus Says. We had Saurav Mukherjee, a legend in the finance space. He was on Paisa Vaisa. He and Anupam have co-written a book, so definitely do check out that episode and go buy their book too. That would be another great thing to do. Uncle Pleasted had a really, really cool episode with hosts of our other show, Mr. and Mrs. Binge Watch, Anirudh and Janice. They were talking about celebrity culture and how that's progressed for the last few years. And it's just been a really, really great week. One episode I do want to shout out. A couple of weeks ago, Pulyabazi did an episode which was just amazing. They were talking about the letters between Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore. Do check those out. Those are really good. And with that, hope to see you again next week.
Namaskar, dear Bandhu. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. These are truly challenging times, and in these times, we need hope. do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on IVM Podcasts, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, there is hope because there's one life and we are alive.